أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه وخاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيد الأولين والآخرين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. It's nice to see you all again. So I'm surprised I'm invited back. I thought you want to get rid of me. But alhamdulillah, it's very nice to be back. And inshallah, we want to honor our dear fourth Imam, Imam Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam. Salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. I had a suggestion that because it's very cold, I should wear a scarf and things. I can see all of you are wearing. I can't really wear, so I feel very shy to start a new trend. Be even more controversial, so I'll leave it at that, I think. So stick to Abba and Kanzu and things. That's why I'm wearing jumper inside. Alhamdulillah, there's a lot of contribution that the fourth Imam has made. And in fact, the title for today is, of course, learning about Sahifa Sajjadiyya. And in Arabic and Farsi, especially Arabic, there are 40 commentaries, or many commentaries, in fact, written about Sahifa. And in that way, we can say that people have given attention to the work, actually. However, maybe not as much attention has been given to Risalatul Hukuk, which is part of my PhD. But definitely Sahifa, you can say, is one of our dear treasures. Now, the question is to what extent we regard it as a treasure in our community, how often we read it, and why, in fact, the fourth Imam actually compiled this or wrote or spoke about these du'as. This is what I want to examine. One of the beautiful things about our dear fourth Imam's life, and this is when I was researching for this lecture, is that these du'as in Sahifa, they're not just supplications. They are poetry. They are literature. They are the inner feelings of a very spiritual man. And when you read these du'as, and as you know, we have many du'as by the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. We have Du'a Kumail and Du'a Al-Iftitah and many others. But the beautiful thing about du'as, which we have been left with, is that they arise from a personal context, usually. So either, for example, what the fourth Imam is going through, what the first Imam is going through. In Nahj Balagha, not all of them are sermons. Actually, there are about maybe 4 or 5 du'as that we have in Nahj Balagha, which are mystical du'as, which show Imam Ali's inner feelings about how he wants to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when you look at du'as like that, you think to yourself, how does this dua impact my personal life? And why did the Imam recite this dua in his or her life? That's the question I want to answer. What went through the Imam's mind that he could come up with these duas? If we are to relate to them, we have to appreciate what is the concept of a dua. And as is often, we have certain situated or chosen duas that we often recite in Ramadan, or maybe on Amal of Ashura, or Amal of Ramadan, etc. But as you know, and I don't need to tell you this, we have so many du'as that really we are perhaps missing the diversity and the themes of all of these du'as. In Sahifa, as I'm sure if any of you have opened the contents of this book, you find du'a for parents, du'a for death, du'a for illness, du'a for welcoming Ramadan, saying goodbye to Ramadan. And then you have added du'as which were not in the original collection, which I'm going to go into. You have munajat. You have whispered du'as or whispered conversations. You have other added du'as of the week or every day that you have. And all of these are from the fourth Imam. So then you think to yourself, we have all of these treasures. Why or what was the purpose of doing these different things? Because sometimes we have repetition, we have to admit that. We have different types of du'as for parents, different types of du'as for death. So what's the point? Which one should we choose? Perhaps there are 2 ways of looking at it. One is these du'as definitely are just simply to show the inner feelings of a particular Imam and no more. But the other way to look at it is they offer us a template, a teaching tool by which we then can construct our own du'as or give us a way to express our own feelings about Allah or about our problems. And I think one of the most important things is, if we are to choose a dua, then it has to relate to our personal circumstance, really. I think that is important. I mean, I do recite certain du'as in my personal life. For example, in Nahju Balagha, simply because I feel like that in maybe a day during the week, or I feel like that. And because it relates to my problem, I'll recite it. At other times, I won't even recite all of the dua. I may think about the concept of the dua and then supplicate myself as to how I wish. And the reason that I say that is only because of how the fourth Imam constructed his du'as. I'm going to use two du'as as a case study just to give us a flavor of the fourth Imam's teaching. And the first one is very short and the second one is longer. And the reason why I've chosen two, one because of the lack of time, but the other is because one of the unique things about As-Sahifa, which I think relates to the fourth Imam's life after Karbala, is that he used du'as as a teaching mechanism for the community. And that I found is really amazing. If you notice, the du'as that we recite on Thursdays or on some other days of the week, they don't always contain doctrines. They're not about aqaid. They are not always about akhlaq. They're always about istighfar and about rahmah. All right? Now, you can see the du'as that we recite after Maghrib and Isha, for example, Dua Kumail, for example, or many others. And some of them, at least I'm talking about within the Shia community that we have chosen, there are a lot about sins. But the du'as which I'm going to share with you, especially the one which I want to share with you is the welcoming of Ramadan, which is amazing dua. That dua isn't just about our sins. It actually teaches us how to behave in Ramadan, how to actually behave. Then you think, what am I actually supplicating for? Because our preconception of supplication is, I'm such a sinful person, and I have to be humble now, and Allah is great, and it's all about my state of helplessness. But du'as aren't just about that. The proof is in Sahifa, because the dua for welcoming Ramadan is all about how you then practically live your life, which is very interesting. Because then dua isn't just a supplication. Dua is teaching me how I should actually lead my life or how I should think about a particular concept. Now, that cleverness we must attribute to the fourth Imam. In his very constrained circumstances, he became a teacher through these du'as. Then for him to construct something like Risalatul Hukuk, a treatise of rights, very understudied, both in the Shia Muslim world and wider Western world, you think, why did he come up with this treatise of rights? The only reason I can ever think of in the last 3 years is because he went through the experience of Karbala. And when we say, oh, the fourth Imam cried so much during his life, it's true, of course, that he was always sad about Karbala, but there's two ways of looking at it. One, either he's always sad, or two, he does something about it. And he clearly does something about it by coming up with a very ingenious set of rights of how human beings can live. And I did deal with this in the third lecture in Muharram, I don't want to repeat it, but this idea of rights to oneself, I was just speaking with some professors about it, because you want to find if you are correct, if maybe you've gone wrong and things, as like both Muslim and non-Muslim professors. And in their own research, they have found that this idea of rights to bodily organs and how it increases self-awareness simply hasn't been come up with by any scholars. Even Muslim scholars have not really used it. This is the kind of depth that I want to go into this lecture. Salawat, please. Now, before I go into the concept of As-Sahifa, obviously it's important to look at really how it is transmitted. And I think this is very important. I found two different kind of views on it, actually. But there are some similarities. One is that it is regarded as mutawatir, that there are numerous chains of transmission. And the reason that is the case is because Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam taught it to his sons. And then they taught it to their companions. So you have different types of chains of transmission going back to Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam. And in particular, Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, we find that the actual Sahifa, which they say was just some old folios or old papers in a notebook, that same Sahifa was passed down to the very hands of Jafar as-Sadiq. Now, it's one thing having oral transmission, but it's another thing having an actual notebook which contains a hadith. Now, I'm inclined to believe that simply because when I looked at the chains of transmission, you do have numerous chains of transmission. And actually you have several different texts of As-Sahifa. So you have some which are compiled by Shahid Awwal or Allama Majlisi and others, and they actually use different du'as. So the one that usually we may have in our Imam Baras, the Chitik's translation, that usually is the one by Shahid Awwal. But there are others, and others who have actually added other du'as and munajat there. Others, the other opinion is that actually there was only one du'a which was transmitted by Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam. One du'a and that's it. And that was a sahifa, that was an old folio or paper, and other du'as became added afterwards. Now, it doesn't really matter, because one thing authentic that we do have this notion of this speciality or uniqueness of the dua of Zaynul Abideen, which is transmitted to his sons and then transmitted to companions, and which has obviously come to us today. And the other verifying thing is people like Muhsin al-Amin, or as I said, Allama Majlisi or Shahid Awwal, they have then gone into compiling their own kind of sahifas. So, in fact, better than Nahju Balagha, you can say, it is a more authentic kind of dua book that we actually have. And the other very interesting, which is up to you whether you want to put weight on this, and I'm sure you've heard this story, is how Allama Majlisi saw Sahifa in a dream and sort of met Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam, and then when he woke up, he was finding the book, and then he went to a librarian, or he went to search in the marketplace, who is this figure that somehow I met, and then he goes to this library or this person, and then he gets given this kind of as-sahifa, and that's the 54 supplications that usually is compiled today, which is Shahid Awwal's version. So you have this other kind of inspirational dream, which somehow has directed us to like this 54 supplications, and others have added to it. But it's up to you what weight you want to put on that. It doesn't matter. Generally speaking, it is regarded as quite an authentic book. Now we go a bit further. What is the point of as-sahifa, really? This is in my analysis, and Jazakallah for inviting me. It gave me a chance, because my PhD is more on Risalat al-Hukuk, but I could at least do a bit more research on as-sahifa. I found one thing which is very striking about the fourth Imam. He is so aware about his own khulq, about his own disposition and character, that when you read as-sahifa, it hits your heart, it strikes your heart. It cuts away of all of the hypocrisy and the falsity and the showiness that maybe all human beings have. And he cuts through it, not just through his language, but through the way that he talks about the ugliness of the human character, but also its potential. This is his moral and spiritual insight. And that is why I said that, and I'm going to read some du'as out, just to show us the eloquence, that it is not just a dua, but it is poetry. It inspires our heart to think in a very different way. I want to give one example specifically about akhlaq. This is dua number 8. And really this one is about akhlaq. I'll just read a few lines. He says, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min hayajanil hirsi wa sawratil ghadab wa ghalabatil hasad wa dha'fis sabri وقلة القناعة وشكاسة الخلق والحاح الشهوة والملكة الحمية. These words not just rhyme, but they are mudaf and mudaf ilayh, which means that you have a possessor and possessor relationship. And I'm sure some of you know this in your studies of Arabic, that he's being so concise about the moral concepts that he doesn't need to take so many lines to describe the morality. This is what he says. O Allah, I seek refuge in you for the agitation of my craving. Then he says, وَصَوْرَةِ الْغَضَبِ وَغَلَبَةِ الْحَسَدِ. And I seek refuge in Allah for the violence of my anger. Because the violence is something contained within the anger which simply just bursts. This is the beauty of having a possessor and possessed relationship. The attribute itself is possessed by the anger. So the characteristic or the sifa is in the ghadab. So you're asking refuge in Allah for the state that allows my own ugliness to suddenly start to come out. Then he says, وَغَلَبَةِ الْحَسَدِ. And he says, the domination of my jealousy. Because jealousy, we say, is consuming. It consumes the soul. And the ghadab and the hasad rhyme, which is sajj, which is full rhyming. So it is poetic. So when you say it, not only does it sound beautiful, but automatically our mind goes to that basic concept. Then he says, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge for the weakness in my patience." How many of us are patient, or how many of us lose our patience? And our patience is a very frail thing. See how the attribute connects to the actual state, which is very beautiful. Because patience is such a thing that we can have it in 1 minute and it goes in the next minute. Then he says that I seek refuge in Allah for the lack of my contentment, or for the littleness of my contentment. How many of us are content? Asking us these questions. Then he says, for the weakness of my disposition, so that my overall character is like a pendulum. Then he says, for the urgency of my shahwa, my desires, that my desires can come at any minute. Then he says, malakatil hamiyya, which is the faculty of, I don't know how to translate this, but hamiyya, this kind of hate or this sting, this faculty I have, which suddenly takes over and allows me to be hateful. I've just given you a very brief thing because it's very long to go into all of this. I'm just giving you brief snippets that in just a few lines, you learn about your own character. You do so in a very poetic way, and you do so in a way that transports your mind by looking at inside what your state actually is. So when we get angry, we sometimes don't realize what will be the consequence, or what's contained in the anger can be violence. What is contained in the patience is actually weakness, because patience requires absolute constancy. As I said, I think on Ashura Day, As-Sadiq alayhi salam has said, one who has no sabr has no faith. That patience is such a thing that it needs to be cultivated, otherwise that iman just goes. This is just a flavor of the kind of akhlaq of the fourth Imam and how he reflected on himself. Salawat. Now, that was something which, of course, you may come across in Dua Makarimul Akhlaq, but this is a rather short dua which we can recite. But one of the greatest contributions, this was my initial point, and this is dua number 44, which is the dua for the coming of Ramadan. And as I said, maybe we can recite this in our communities or in our programs. Sometimes we can change dua iftitah and recite these duas. And there's a reason that I say this. This came up with discussion, so Irfan and others should get the thawab, because I thought about it. That I've yet to find a lot of duas which actually teach you how to actually behave in a particular way. Now, I'm going to read some bits in English because there is a particular teaching mechanism happening here. And when I traced how he's teaching this, I found that he starts off by looking at how we should be thankful of Ramadan, but then goes into certain duties. And that's what I think is the most beautiful thing. Because I always feel, and this is what happens to me in Ramadan, is I feel that my fast is not worthy. Because it's simply about not eating and not drinking water, going to sleep, obviously getting thawab while we're sleeping. But apart from that, what else am I doing? What else is Ramadan meant to do to me? And he answers this question. This is what he says. He says, praise belongs to Allah. This is dua number 44. Praise belongs to Allah, who guided us to His praise and placed us among the people of praise. We are privileged in Ramadan, that we might be among the thankful for His mercy, and that He might shower us with mercy or recompense, with the mercy of the good doers, the people who do good. So we are in a very privileged position if we're able to do Ramadan. This is number one. We are thankful people. We are people who should emanate praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should not take Ramadan lightly. The tone is quite a subtle but bold one. Then he tells us that in this month there are different roads to Ramadan. What are these roads? So he says, it is the month of Ramadan, the month of fasting, the month of submission, the month of tuhur, of purity, the month of putting us to test, the month of standing in prayer, and the month, of course, in which the Quran was revealed. Now, you've heard this because we have this in many Ramadan du'as. Fine, no problem. But he's giving us a basic outline. Then he goes into something very specific. And this reflects the right of the fast in Risalatul Hukuk, and the right of the fast over us is that it is a hijab, an actual barrier or protection for our limbs and our whole existence. And an action like a fast has a right over us. And how does he explain this? He says, "O Allah, bless Muhammad and his household, and help us to fast in this month by restraining our limbs, okay, from acts of disobedience towards you, and our employing in them to that which pleases you." So our limbs, the way we walk, going to work, greeting each other, whatever it is. So that why is our limbs important? All our limbs, by the way. So that we lend not our ears to idle talk, and hurry not our eyes to something which causes us to go astray. Okay? And that we stretch not our hands towards that which is forbidden, and we do not move our feet to that which is prohibited. And we only go to that which you, O Allah, have made lawful for us. And O Allah, make our tongue speak that which is lawful and that which reflects you. And we undertake nothing in this month except that which brings your reward, and we pursue nothing but what protects us from your punishment. Okay? Now this is very specific about how our whole being should be. It makes us think what makes our fast very worthy. Very practical kind of dua. Everything from our eyes and our ears and our limbs is actually covered. And then he codifies this as some kind of legal right in his treatise of rights. So the dua and this treatise of rights are very much in sync. Now as I was reading this, I was thinking, well, okay, this is very beneficial for me. But he goes one step further, and I was very surprised by this. Then he says, give us success in this month to tighten our bonds of brotherhood with devotion and gifts. Attend to our neighbors with bestowal and giving. Rid our possessions from claims, from constant wants. And purify our possessions by giving in charity. And that we go back to him who has gone far from us. It's all about family and brotherly and sisterly bonds. Those people who we don't normally visit, we go and visit. And we treat justly the person who has wronged us. And we make peace with him who shows enmity towards us. Subhanallah. What is the point of Ramadan if our relationships remain broken after that month? The month is a month not just of personal reform, which was what my limbs do, but of societal, of communal reform. What a beautiful thing that he's teaching his followers. Then he says, O Allah, I seek nearness to you through blameless works which will purify us from sins and preserve us from renewing faults. Then he says two other things towards the end of the dua. He says, not only would you purify us from our sins, but may you also stop shaitan from making our fast being diverted. Because we, of course, know that when we fast, desires come and our limbs may go to certain places or we may backbite. So the shaitan may do that as well. So he also is very realistic about the fast. To me, this is one of the original and best dua that I've read, which teaches me and inshallah teaches us how I should actually fast. Now to me, I think I'd rather go and eat in the fast. I'd rather break the fast that way than do these things. That's how much I feel when he's explaining this dua. Because that morsel of food, yes, fine, we obviously abstain from food and drink, but the real purpose of the fast is what he's saying here. That sense of personal and social reform. And then you think, all our community practices, or how we can maximize the potential of the Muslim Ummah to reform society is in this dua. We can construct our programs, our habits, we can construct our madrasas based on these kind of du'as. And then you think that the task of the fourth Imam after Karbala was so huge that he used this mechanism to teach these a'mal, to teach aqaid, to teach furwadeen. And this is the great worth of As-Sahifa Sajjadiyya. Salawat, please. I hope I've given you some kind of inclination, because obviously I can't do all the du'as and these sorts of things. But it just gives us a flavor of actually how we can use these du'as practically in the community. I want to end just on one or two things, which are some etiquettes of du'a, which I think are perhaps very difficult to do, because we always need to be in a very humble and very contented state when we ask, when we supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim in the Quran, Surah number 40, verse 60. وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمُ ادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَكْبِرُونَ عَنْ عِبَادَتِي سَيَدْخُلُونَ جَهَنَّمَ دَاخِرِينَ. And your Lord says, call upon me and I will answer you. Surely those who are too proud for my service shall soon enter hell abased. One of the greatest etiquettes of any dua, not just as-sahifa, but any dua, is to remove that pride from us and to instill in us a state of humility. And I think this is a very difficult thing to do, that to be in a state of absolute contemplation when we supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is the way that we can remove some of our ills. And there are some beautiful hadith which I actually found. I'm just sharing this with you. Just in the way how this is sort of hadith al-Qudsi, if you say. So authenticity is always questionable, but it gives us a kind of etiquette. Allah says to Prophet Isa, this is in Biharul Anwar, by the way, volume 90. O Isa, humble your heart before me and remember me in private, and let it be known to you that I become happy when you come towards me with hope and fear. And don't you ever do it with a dead heart, rather do it with a living heart, an active heart. And whenever we are to ask for dua, that sense of attentiveness to what we want is one of the best etiquettes. And a final one, the fourth Imam says, fear of God does not mean weeping or shedding tears. For as long as there is no taqwa, which keeps the person from sins, the fear is false. And that to me is one of the greatest lessons when you ask for dua. That at that state I may cry, but if my fear or my crying is false and does not lead to reformation, that it means my state wasn't something very practical itself. Again, As-Sahifa teaches us, as I started with the first dua, what should our state be? The fourth Imam is purifying us. Remove our jealousy. Look at the frailty of our patience. Look at our ghadab. Look at the violence that stems. If we can maybe, this is a practical thing, focus on one or two of these traits in the dua, rather than focusing on so many of the traits, then maybe that is a start of genuine reform for us, inshallah. Salawat. Inshallah, I'll open it up for any Q&A before I do the maqtan, inshallah.
Thank you. Just want, when you are explaining the authenticity of the Sahifa, the 54 duas, or the number, are these the most authentic? You said there are some additional dua, or they are not duas, but what do you call it?
Munajat.
Munajat, yeah. So these are additionals. But the number 54, they are the most authentic, and there are other compilers of Sahifa, apart from Shahid Awwal.
Yeah.
So are these 54 also appearing in other compilations, or how do they authentify it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Jazakallah, to be honest, it's a matter of choice really, because there are 5, let's say, versions of As-Sahifa, and it seems, and there are, I think in the last 20 years, there's another Sahifa which is currently being compiled, to my knowledge, which is now adding the rest of the du'as of Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam. To me, I found a couple of things, that it was the choice of the compiler to add the du'as. So it's not about authenticity, it's just that they wanted to show the breadth of the du'as, actually. It wasn't really about, but the authenticity, as I said, according to the dream which Allama Majlisi had, he saw these 54 supplications. But others say no, it was one, and then it got added afterwards. But in the dream, he saw, if you like, 54. He recognized that that was the 54. So I don't think personally it's a very important question, but I think that the authenticity of each dua is recognized. That's not a problem. The question is really, was it just 54 that came together, or did further compilers add in others? And I think there's some debate about that. But we know for sure that the munajat and the du'as of the week were added later on. Yeah.
Sorry, when you say Allama Majlisi saw one in a dream,
Yeah.
and the others are, how did he got hold of others, other duas?
Well, basically, the Sahifa that he saw, I'm just going by this, what is narrated, he saw whatever these du'as or compilation or collection, and when he went to the library or wherever it was on the marketplace the next day, he recognized that as the right Sahifa in his dream. Yeah, that I'm just saying according to that dream. And others have said they've accepted that but added, and others have disputed both of those things and said no, there was only one dua narrated, and that was it. And others were simply compiled by, I don't know, Mohsin Amin or Hur al-Amili and these people, who's compiler of Wasail Shia. So other compilers have said, well, to be honest, no, there was only a few or one dua which was actually passed down, and then they've compiled the rest of the duas and made it as Sahifa. But generally speaking, it is quite accepted as a mutawatir thing, but I'm just being very honest with you that I did read in my research another opinion, which I'm sharing with you. But I don't really see how it affects the authenticity in any... Am I answering your question, or am I not answering?
When you say compiled,
Yeah.
means they were there as bits and pieces here and there, and then they collected.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I mean.
Actually, like
when I mean the actual narration, I mean what was passed down from one person to one person. Sorry if I wasn't clear. Sorry.
Any more questions? Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much indeed for your lecture.
No.
Can I ask you, just in your opinion, what do you think was the primary purpose of the Imam writing and reciting this dua? Was it for himself, or was it to teach us? Because it seems difficult to reconcile somebody who is immaculate to have some of the things you described, for example, in the dua for seeking refuge, which you just recited, to have those concerns. It's irreconcilable.
Jazakallah. Well, as I'm sure you know, it all depends how you view isma and the concept of infallibility. Coming from asima, this is kind of barrier or protection, etc. But there are two things. One is, generally speaking, at least in the majority Shia view, the concept of desires or feeling desires, and even the whispers of shaitan, those things the Prophet and Imams can actually feel, but they choose not to act upon. And that is why we say they're like protected. So the concept of then committing the sin is not there, but the desires which was there in the dua, this kind of ghadab, for example, or hasad and all of these things, that we generally accept they can feel. So you can reconcile it with the majority Shia view by saying that he's asking for continual protection for these things. The second thing is to say that he did feel these things genuinely, and in the du'as, one of them I shared during Muharram, where he was very angry about the killers of Karbala, and he was saying cut off their armies and their flocks and all that sort of thing. There you can say he was asking for patience to bear the tragedy. So there's a slight diversion from the view that he's now asking for real protection, that he's now going to get angry, and he's expressing that anger in the dua. Third, I believe he is also teaching us. I believe primarily it's for himself. That's my very small view. But I also believe he is teaching us, because the way that this has come down to us and the way it seemed to have being transmitted in the community, especially even by later compilers, shows us that this was a teaching mechanism. I mean, this is my interpretation of it. And there are, as I said, there are many commentaries written on as-Sahifa to testify to these things. And then you can have a very radical view of infallibility. Obviously, that would be a different view altogether, we should say, no, this does apply to him because there's some kind of minor and major sins. But as I'm sure you're aware, that's generally not accepted within the Shia view. So, yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At the time of Imam Sajjad, how was this compiled? Was it written down by himself? Someone else wrote it?
Yeah.
Typically, du'as and munajat and poetry are very much spontaneous. Imam Sajjad didn't think about it or try to write it down somewhere. And he might have recited once or twice. How was it recorded right away and was kept? Because most of the books and divans of poetry are actually written by either poets or written by the disciples at the same time. So the question is how it was actually written down. That's one. And two, if spontaneous things come from the mind and heart of an imam, why should the Shias follow that so religiously? If we don't read a certain passage of Quran every day or every night or every Thursday. Why should we, for example, read Iftitah every day during Ramadan, or every Thursday we should? It wasn't recommended for everyone to do that. Why do we have to read that more so than a certain passage of Quran?
Jazakallah. For the first part of the question, in my research, what I did find was that it was Zaynul Abideen alayhi salam did actually tell his son, like Al-Baqir alayhi salam, to actually transcribe, to actually write it down. In both opinions, when I was looking at this, he did actually write this down, and it was in an old folio, old paper, which then was kept, and then eventually was built up as a Sahifa. So this was actually communicated to his sons, and they actually transcribed it. Now, Zaynul Abideen may have actually written it down. I didn't find evidence as much for that, but it's plausible. But I know that his sons definitely have transcribed it. That's what I found. One. Two is about the spontaneous and the hard thing. No, I agree with you that there are two things. It is from the heart of the Imam. But culturally and as a community, we have decided to do the du'as in congregation, which doesn't have to be. There are, however, some hadith, like if you look at the hadith about du'a kumail, and that one, although there is a specific time that you recite, like Thursdays or once a month or once every year on 15th Sha'ban, and there's a particular kind of say that, look, you must, or it is recommended to recite. Now, not necessarily as a community, but for individuals to recite it. So there you can make a link and say, right, okay, maybe the community should do it. So you have some hadith, definitely, which do tell us reciting the dua for certain times. But most of them, no. Most of them, I agree with you, we don't have that, and we don't have to do that. That's why I did suggest, that's why I specifically picked this dua as a suggestion, that maybe sometimes in Ramadan, instead of dua iftitah, we can do this dua, which when I was researching this for this whole week, I found this to be such a beautiful dua that we should try to do it, inshallah. I'm sure some of the brothers have discussed it as well, but no, we can choose and we can do things in a very personal way. I think it's maybe culture. Yeah.
Knowing that after Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, it's a very strong hadith, sort of common share between the older school of thought, that after Prophet there are 12 spring which we know as an imam to become protecting the Prophet Muhammad's sunnah. And each imam, as you mentioned, they have their own mission from their own time. With Imam Sajjad, he went through such a very deep tribulation hit him, and to forgive the whole Karbala in order to put the society of the Muslim together, because Imam Hussein got martyred in order the true Islam will stand up for the Muslim. That was the first thing. The second was that he had to carry on that mission after. So in order to do that, he had to cleanse all inside. I mean, of course, they are purified, but at the same time, these difficulties will make them more purified, because Allah, comes, the purification and the light of Allah comes through all these difficulties. And every moment, every person who has got a taqwa, particularly in the position of prophet or imam, they usually have a very, very hard time, very harsh action or life, compared to the ordinary person. So through this difficulty, he created these du'as. And as you mentioned, that he had to forgive and clean the jealousy, the wanting, and whatnot. So Allah has given him a lots of knowledge, and through this supplication, it's been created by him, then compiled and in the reach to us. So the things that you said, how we have to purify ourselves in Shahr Ramadan, it's so interesting in dua number 4, that although he knows, one of the things that he created these du'as was he completely, every moment comes to that point too, whole the society were against them. Even the family did not give them a hand. It was a total relying on his own creator, Allah. Then these beautiful words came from his heart. Okay, it was for his own situation, which we are getting the benefit. Here he talks about Allahumma ashab Muhammad, khasa alladhina ahsanu ashabahu. That means people were sort of completely following the disciple of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although some of the disciples were wrong, here he praising them in order to teach us forgiveness and correcting the situation, because he wants Allah's knowledge to stand on his own foot after Prophet Muhammad. This is what I found out about his supplication too. I don't know how far you agree with that.
No, alhamdulillah, I agree. I believe it was from difficulty. I believe he was teaching us, and this concept of salawat, or remembering the household. I think if you look in virtually all of the du'as, every 5 or 6 lines, there's always a salawat, always. And is a reminder about the household of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So, no, I agree with you. And as I said, that my point is, how do we start to now use this, in the wider community and in our ummah? Really, one thing I forgot to mention actually in my conclusion was that, if you go to most bookshops and you find, because today there's a trend of spirituality but without religion, being spiritual, and people pick up books of poetry and things. I think one of the tasks that we should do is try to make our Sahifa digestible or universal, or make some kind of book of poems about it, because it is that beautiful.
My own personal experience, being with many Sunni community, the only sort of link I could have gave them this book, and they could not refuse it. After when they start reading it, they could not refuse it. And more important, the fourth dua, that he praises the ashab, which the Shia some group cursing them. This is the point I was trying to mention.
Okay,
the link that he started after Karbala doing it, no one else ever done it.
Right. No, yes, that is also there. Yes. No, as you know, that is a cultural kind of issue which we have to resolve, inshallah. Yes.
Take one more question.
Thank you very much, Haji. Just a little comment about why should we read dua as well. Quran, is not as mandatory. Just a little explanation or clarification. Out of the, say, 600 pages of Quran, the only mandatory, if we want to stick to mandatory, is something like half a page, which is Surah Al-Fatiha and a small verse that you can get along all your life, and you'll be within your really absolute mandatory. But how about the other 599 and a half pages? It's for our own benefit to read. And in Quran, there are verses that say ادعوني أستجب لكم أن الذين يستكبرون عن عبادتي سيدخلون جهنم داخرين, and other verses that recommends highly supplication. And God in His mercy has given us these ai who have made it easier, given us like eloquence that we would not have achieved ourselves. So it's the difference between somebody in a desert who has only a drink of water to survive, reading that little verse of Quran, and somebody who lives in a palace. So we are recommended for our own benefit to read the whole of Quran as much as possible. And there are recommendations like read Surah Al-Jumu'ah and Al-Munafiqun fi Laylat Al-Jumu'ah. Read Al-Kahf wal-Isra kada kada. Surah Al-Rahman. There are some recommendations. So there also are recommendations about supplications. And Dua Kumail or Dua Al-Jawshan or Sahifa Sajjadiyya, they are recommended. If we don't do them, we're not going to be crucified. If we do them, it's for our own benefit.
Yes. Oh no, I agree. And that's why I mentioned about Dua Kumail. We have the specific hadith about its recitation on Thursdays and whatever. And yes, that's why I said it's up to us to maximize our potential and look at these du'as as supplications, as poetry, inshallah, that we can reform ourselves. But I think maybe as a Shia community, I don't know, at least in the UK, perhaps we need to really look at it as a treasure, you know, not as a buried treasure. It's actually treasure that we use it, inshallah. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Brothers and sisters, as we left Karbala, As-Sajjad alayhi salam said something very beautiful, very courageous, but very sad. He says, "O Father, your cries for help have torn the arteries from my heart and have taken my peace of mind. I need to go. I wish to give my life for you," he says. Al-Husayn alayhi salam says, "O son, you are unwell. Jihad is not your obligation, nor is it permissible for you, and you are the proof, the Imam of my Shia." Then he says, "O father, should I watch while you are killed? If only I had died before this." This was Imam Sajjad's farewell to his father. In his life, it was reported that he was constantly sad about Karbala, about losing his family in this way. And yet the du'as that he spread and the things that he wrote, these are the things that were left in the community. To the point where Al-Walid ibn Abd al-Malik said, "I cannot have rest as long as Ali ibn Husayn is in this world." And when Al-Walid became king, he decided to assassinate the Imam. When poison was administered to the Imam's body, it reacted inside his body. And as he was passing away, he said, "Praise belongs to Allah, who has made good to us His promise and made us inherit the land. We may abide in the garden where we please. So goodly is the reward of the workers." When people saw the body of the fourth Imam alayhi salam, when Al-Baqir did the ghusl, it is reported that his body was knock-kneed, that his body was bent. Why? For two reasons. One, that he used to carry sacks of food and money for poor people. And the second was that he used to constantly be in prostration. Our fourth Imam alayhi salam died in a way that was so sad, that was so bent, that it reflected the ills and the difficulties of Karbala and his own family. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on his soul and the shuhada of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Surah Al-Fatiha.